The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining this REMI webinar, Chips and Jobs, Economic and Fiscal Impacts of the Micron Facility in Upstate New York. This webinar is being presented by Dr. Peter Evangelakis, Senior Vice President of Economics and Consulting at REMI. At REMI, we offer economic modeling software solutions that help policymakers inform policy decisions. Our software allows these policymakers to test the economic and demographic outcomes of policy related to economic development, tax, transportation, environment, equity, and more, before they're actually implemented. If you are interested in learning more about our modeling capabilities, please reach out to info@remi.com, and we would gladly connect you with one of the appropriate members of our team. If you have any questions during this presentation, I encourage you to enter that question into the question box at any time. Time permitting, I will moderate these questions to Peter following the conclusion of the presentation. If we run out of time, we'll be sure to reach out to you personally through email to help you out. I also want to let everyone know that shortly after the conclusion of the webinar, an email will be sent to you that contains a link to both the recording and the slides of this presentation. If you have any questions based off these materials, please reach out to info@remi.com. We'll be glad to connect you with Peter or assist you in any way we can. Thank you again, everyone, for joining, and we'll now get into the presentation. Take it away, Peter.
Thanks, Brian, and welcome, everyone. So we wanted to present today about some work that we did about a year ago, or that we wrapped up about a year ago, looking at kind of a major project. And I think there are a number of different contexts here, but certainly in the context of the Chips and Jobs Act, that was passed by Congress and signed into law. It's been kind of a major bipartisan effort, and has been aimed at, among other things, supporting the semiconductor industry, kind of growing it within the United States. And so this is looking at the economic and fiscal impacts of one of those, the Micron semiconductor facilities in upstate New York, which is one of the biggest economic development projects in the state's history. So just for that context, Micron is going to be building and equipping several large semiconductor facilities in Clay, New York, which is just outside of Syracuse. And it's investing over the course of about 20 years, investing just about $100 billion in capital expenditures, that is land and buildings, machinery, and equipment, as well as an additional $1.5 billion or so for infrastructure, kind of around around the actual facilities to kind of make it kind of a viable location. That is happening, like I said, over a 20-year period. There are kind of two phases to that investment that we'll get into a little bit. And throughout those investment, kind of those investment years, there'll be a ramping up of the operations to long-term levels. And what we did is we were asked by our clients at Empire State Development, the economic development agency of New York State, to do an economic and fiscal impact analysis at the state and local levels over a 30-year period, so 2025 through 2055. And as you might guess, given the large scope of the project, certainly in the context of Central New York, which is very, very pleased to have such a strong economic development driver back in their area, as well as, of course, the national and kind of geopolitical context of bringing more semiconductor manufacturing to the United States. The results, have been cited by everyone from President Biden to the New York senators, Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, to New York's governor Kathy Hochul, just over a year ago, or actually maybe just under a year ago, they had a kind of an announcement event where all of these and several others officials spoke. They did quote some of the numbers publicly that you'll see coming out of our report. So this has been kind of a major effort, and we're very proud to be kind of a part of bringing this to fruition. So the approach that we took for our study was, we used a tax PI model of New York State. So Empire State Development is a longtime client of ours. So we used their tax PI model of New York State. It breaks the state into 10 official economic development regions. It's at the 70 industry level, so fairly detailed industries. And we used it to look at the investment period that I talked about, as well as the operations. And again, the investment period lasted about 20 years, starting in 2025, or so we estimated, and the ongoing operations, which ramp up starting in 2026. And we looked at them all the way through 2055. That was going to be the window that we were asked to look at. It's certainly not a guarantee of any, of what the timeline is after that, but that was the window of main interest. So we looked over that overall that 30-year period. And like I said, the investment occurred in two phases, basically, two 10-year phases. So phase one starts in 2025, phase two in 2035. And what we looked at are the impacts of the investment and operations on a variety of economic and fiscal metrics. So employment, of course, is always kind of a key metric that's of interest. And certainly, bringing jobs to Central New York was paramount, especially as they discussed, for example, in that announcement event, they had, the person introducing President Biden was a union member. There's a real focus on union jobs there as well, but certainly jobs in general, and not just the jobs at the facility, but all of the other jobs that will be generated. And that's something we'll talk about in a little bit, as well as the size of the economy measured by the total economic output and by the gross domestic product, impact on disposable income for households, impact on kind of population attraction. Certainly, population movement has been a key, kind of a key concern for New York State generally, wanting to be able to attract as much population as they can. And certainly this helps with that. With jobs comes kind of the attraction of both workers and their families. And then on the fiscal side, what are the impacts on state government finances as well as local government finances? And we were able to do a fiscal benefit cost analysis that compared the analysis that we did compared the state revenue impacts, kind of the additional revenue generated that we estimated was generated relative to the stream of incentives that were being offered to Micron. So just to get a little bit into the weeds, the investment period here we have represented the two phases. Again, the investment was broken out into three types. So there's kind of the land and building, the machinery and equipment, and utility construction. Again, combined, these all were about 100 billion in total. About maybe 70% of that or so is the machinery and equipment. And as you can see in the tables, don't worry too much about reading the tables in detail, but as you'll be able to see, certainly when you receive these slides later on and peruse them at your leisure, you'll see the machinery and equipment investments go all the way throughout the 20 years across both phases of the investment period. They account for roughly 70% of the investment spending. Most of the rest is the building and the land, about 30%, and then there's that infrastructure piece as well, just over $1 billion. You can see that basically represented here kind of year by year. So these are going to be the inputs that we put into the model. It is a dynamic model, so we're able to look year by year and look at the impact year over year and how one year affects the next. So there's a lot of granularity in the analysis that we can do. And so, you can see here some of the summary statistics as well. So again, you'll be able to peruse these a little bit more in detail. But basically what we did is we, for kind of the land and building piece, we looked at, the demand for the construction industry. For machinery and equipment, we looked at demand for machinery manufacturing, and for utility construction, again, that was, demand for the construction industry in the state. And then in the operations, the first piece that we want to look at is, just the baseline employment, who's working at the facilities as a Micron employee. We broke this out into three main pieces. The main, kind of the biggest by far is the engineers. That's in the semiconductor and related device manufacturing sector. But we also have, some management positions and some administrative positions that we broke out into their own industries. And so you can see each of those represented here. We've shown the first 5 years, kind of a middle period of about 5 years, and then the last year of the study. So not all of the years are represented here. So you'll notice that there are some time jumps, trying to capture as best we can in a graphic, kind of the time path of the employment ramping up to its maximum. And then we also importantly modeled the kind of the contractors that would be associated with the facility. So this is a little bit unique to semiconductor facility, where it requires constant care, and so there will be additional contractors, basically helping to maintain the equipment and make sure that it's running properly. I think my understanding is that it's basically a 24/7 kind of job to make sure that everything's running smoothly. Semiconductor manufacturing is a very delicate, precise operation. And so there are, the kind of machinery manufacturing contractors, as well as kind of the building services. So kind of two different pieces of kind of the equipment and the maintenance. And you can see broken out here, most of the contractors will be in state. And so they will essentially be indistinguishable, from as an outside observer, you wouldn't necessarily be able to distinguish them from everyday Micron employees. They would go into the facility every day, but that there would be a number of out-of-state contractors that would kind of cycle through and kind of visit for periods of time, a couple weeks or so at a time, and kind of cycle through. And so there would be, in the kind of machinery manufacturing industry, there would be some of those contractors. And with those contractors that come in from out of state and visit for periods of time, there are also estimates of how much they would be spending while they were in the state in kind of the main categories. The accommodations, so they would be staying in hotels while they're in Clay, New York. They would be purchasing food in the local area, and they would be using ground transportation services to get around. And so that spending was also modeled to kind of round out the kind of the impact of the contractors. And then finally, as you might expect, there will be robust R&D going on in the facility. And so kind of the bottom table here is showing the ramp up in R&D spending, basically ramping up through roughly through the second phase, but continuing to grow in kind of nominal terms after that. And so you can see with all of these tables, again, we're kind of taking certain key years or certain key periods. So not all of the years are represented, just to make things easier to read. We're always happy to share more detail if desired. So with that said, those were the inputs. So I want to give a brief overview of the results, and then I'll show some of the results in more detail. And what I'll do after that is I'm going to show how this looked in the model itself, and kind of how the results looked, that we then took out of the model and put into the report. So the first is the impact on total employment. In an average year, the impact was about 45,000 jobs in total, with about just under 40,000 being in central New York, which was the region that Syracuse falls into in the model. So and that number, the number that was quoted actually got up to about 50,000, which is the annual impact. As you get into the final years, the annual impacts kind of at the end of the ramp up period do get a little bit over 50,000 as well, but kind of on average over the whole 30-year period, about 45,000 jobs, and most of those in the central New York region, kind of locally, with a robust employment multiplier over 4. So basically, for every direct job created, there was over 3 additional jobs created across the state. In terms of the size of the economy, annual impacts on economic output of about 16 billion per year, and 9 billion dollar impact on real estate GDP, and an average annual population impact of almost 60,000 people. So again, generally speaking, these the impacts on population grow over time. So you will see in the latter years impacts that are even higher. But taking kind of an average over the whole period, we see an average year sees an influx of about 60,000 relative to the baseline. It's not a cumulative number, so it's not 60,000 every year. It's compared to what would have happened in that particular year. So just to head off that question, because that can be sometimes confusing. So that's the kind of population impact. Of course, that's going to be one of the drivers of revenue impacts that we'll see, as well as the impact on real disposable income of roughly 5 billion, kind of in the aggregate across the state each year. And then looking at the fiscal impacts, we saw the present value, basically kind of looking over the whole period and kind of discounting future years to kind of represent kind of the value of future years versus the current year, to kind of put everything in the same footing. We saw a present value of an impact of over 7 billion on state government revenue over the 30-year period, and we did use a 3% discount rate per Empire State Development, and there was a present value impact of just under 11 billion in additional local government revenue generated, and most of that, about 85%, again, occurred in the region, in the central New York region, where the facility would be located. And then in terms of kind of the fiscal return for just the state government, we saw about a 2-to-1 impact. As you'll see later on, the present value of the incentive package was on the order of about 3.5 billion. The impact on state government revenue was about 7 billion. So that's where that 2-to-1 ratio comes from. Now, just to get into a little bit more detail, and I think this will also be a little bit more valuable for you to peruse, again, when you have the slides in front of you. So don't worry too much about all of the numbers here. There's a lot going on. But basically, this table is showing results for the state of New York. That's kind of the top section. And then the bottom section is impacts for central New York. Again, for that, the model region, kind of the several county region where the facility would be located. And we see the overall employment impact, and then that's broken out into kind of the direct impacts, again, of just the facility employees, basically, and some of the construction. And then, indirect impacts, which are kind of the direct supply chain impacts, and that includes the contractors. And then finally, the induced impacts, which is basically everything else. That includes the effect of additional spending. Again, there's a lot of newly created disposable income that's spent in the local economy. That's a major driver of jobs, as well as additional investment activity from businesses that see growth as a result of kind of the secondary effects of the Micron facility. And so you see robust impacts there. And again, most of the impacts accrue in Central New York, although you do see some indirect and induced impacts occurring, especially outside of the region. So you see some of the impacts, while most of the impacts are in that local region, there are some benefits that accrue all over the state as well. If we look at the other key economic metrics, we have the impact on output and GDP, again, for New York and for Central New York region, disposable personal income and population. So you can see, again, reading these tables, it's the same idea where we've taken certain key chunks of time. So not all of the years are presented in these tables, just so that they're readable. But you'll be able to see, you can see kind of on the right-hand side, the average impacts. You'll always have the average impacts, so you'll be able to match those up with the summary, and then you can look in some more detail kind of at the year-by-year impacts. And finally, I wanted to talk a good bit about the fiscal impacts. Again, just as a reminder, we looked at both the impact on the state government revenue as well as the local government revenue. So here I've shown in the first line the overall state government revenue impact, and you can see the average impact, and I have an additional column here that shows you the present value. And so there is that, since this is in millions, that 7,000 number, that's actually 7.1 billion. That's the number I quoted earlier for the overall kind of present value impact of state government, on state government revenue. And we can see here kind of that broken out into certain key categories. So at the state level, obviously, the majority of it is going to the personal income tax, given that there's a robust personal income tax in the state of New York, as well as corporate income tax. That's the kind of second subcategory. Sales excise and user tax. That's that third line, as well as property transfers and kind of other taxes and fees. So kind of the first three of those kind of breakout categories are probably the most notable and kind of where most of the action is. As you can see that broken out. For the local government revenue, we didn't break those out in the report, but in the demonstration that I'll show you in a second, you'll get to see the breakout a little bit. So that's a little bit of a teaser. And again, you can see the present value there being about that 10.7 billion number for for the local, kind of the overall local government revenue. And actually, I'll show you a little bit of the breakout across regions as well for the local government revenue impacts. And you can see in the second to last line pictured the New York State incentive package, again, year by year. And again, I think there's some years not pictured here. So this is not the full picture in this one table. But again, there's more detail available if desired. And then finally, the last line gives you that fiscal benefit cost ratio of about 2.0. Again, that's just for the state, kind of the state relative to the incentives that it's offering to Micron. And I should say, this incentive package, this was separate from any incentives that were provided through the CHIPS Act. So that was, in addition to that. So this was just the state incentives. So I'm going to switch over now and show how this looked in the model. And then after that, I'll be happy to take any questions that have come up. So this is our tax PI model. So this is the model of New York. There are some kind of surrounding area as well. In this particular model, we focused on the 10 regions in the state. And so I'll show what a part of this analysis looked like. So this is these are the inputs that went into the phase 1 analysis. So remember, there are 2 phases. So this is not going to show the full picture in its own right, but this is a good representation of what kind of both phases of the analysis did look like in terms of putting it into the model and what it looked like in the results. So there are 5 pieces here. So the first piece was the employment, and so we have the computer and electronic product manufacturing. That's kind of the semiconductor industry. We have management and administration. So those were the three sections. Those are those 3 types of jobs that we put in that you saw earlier in the inputs. We did this thing, just for those who are interested in some of the weeds, I'll just say, we nullified the investment response, and what that means is the model. If you just put in employment or output kind of directly into the model, there is going to be an investment response naturally in the model. And depending on the kind of capital intensity and other kind of properties of the industry, the investment response may be different. Obviously, a big manufacturing facility and kind of a small business may have very different investment profiles. And so those are going to be reflected in kind of the built-in responses of the model. Here, since we had very detailed data on the investment spending, we chose to turn off the model's natural investment response and just enter in the investment spending directly. So that's what's going on there. We also had data on the compensation for each of the direct workers. And again, in the model, if you just put in jobs in a particular industry, in a particular region, the model is going to have a forecast of what the pay is, per worker per year. And so the model would, have an overall estimate of what is the total kind of direct labor income that's associated with these jobs. Since again, we had information on that directly, we made some adjustments. That's that second piece. And again, it's the same kind of categories of the engineers, the managers, and the admin staff. Here you may see some negative numbers. That's totally fine. It's just basically an adjustment relative to what the model expects. And so obviously, with more detailed project data, we're able to do that more accurately. The investment piece is represented next. And we can see the construction and the machinery manufacturing is the biggest piece. We see those as the top 2 lines in that third chunk. And we see some other pieces here. We see kind of a real estate transaction and some spending in the educational services, which is a training spending as well. That's fairly small. It's just a few million. But that is in there as well. The fourth piece is it goes into professional, scientific, and technical services. That's the R&D spending, and so that can be that's represented here. And again, these are just the first few years. If we scroll, I'll just scroll in the R&D just to show you kind of the the annual numbers. You can see for phase 1, it goes through 2034. The phase 2 would pick up from there. But you can see kind of the year-by-year inputs based on the data that we were given. And finally, we had data on the contractors. So this was some of the direct employment here represented as spending, but basically converted direct employment. Again, we had a compensation adjustment. We also nullified the investment. Again, that was very similar to the direct jobs. The contractor jobs we treated the same. And then the one key addition was these 4 lines here in the middle, which is the consumer spending. And so we had accounting for the accommodations and the meals and the ground transportation. So that's captured there. And so when we put all of that through the model, the results came out looking like this. And so let me guide you through the results. So this is the economic summary. This is kind of a high-level dashboard where you always land when you first open the results. There is a great amount of detail that can be accessed through other tables. I'm happy to show those. For example, the first line here, we have the impact on total employment, but you can also look at employment by industry. You know, again, there's 70 industries in the model, as I mentioned kind of early in the presentation. And so you're able to look at impacts for each of the industries, and you can, you know, look at them and sort them so you can get a sense of which industries are most impacted. And I think that will also kind of help tell the overall story of all of the various impacts that this facility will have. So if you'll remember, this is just phase one. So again, these are not the total impacts. These are kind of you know, one piece. You know, here we have the output and GDP impacts year by year, as well as you know, the disposable income impacts here. And then in terms of the fiscal, we can look here at the revenue impacts. So this is at the state level. So we can look here at, you know, this top line in bold has the overall state revenue impacts, again, just for phase one. And then that's broken out into those 5 categories that I showed you before: the personal income, corporate income tax, sales tax, property, and other revenue sources. And so you can see those results over time. And again, going through fiscal year 2055. And the final piece that I'll show you is when we ran this, and we also basically ran this for so kind of the local areas, you know, where we ran the same inputs, but basically we had a different budget setup where we were able to capture the kind of the local government revenue sources, you know, by, you know, for each of the 10 regions that are, you know, for each of the 10 model regions that represent the kind of economic development regions in the state. So here there were a few more categories, you know, but you know, some of the key ones are, you know, property taxes, you know, not surprisingly, sales taxes, you know, a lot of local sales taxes, you know, as well as, you know, a variety of others. Personal income taxes, there may be a question here. Personal income taxes is for the New York City region. So there were, again, impacts. Most of the impacts were in central New York, but some were spread out across the state. The impacts that occurred in New York City, to the extent that they raised incomes in New York City, you know, New York City residents face a city income tax. And so that's what's represented here. As well as this business income tax, again, New York City. And so I'll show you also, not just for the state as a whole, but if we look, for example, at central New York, we can see that the vast majority of the impacts are falling in the central New York region. But then if we kind of scroll through some of the other regions, you know, we can see, for example, in the Finger Lakes region, we see, you know, impacts, you know, in the maybe low tens of millions. You know, Long Island is, you know, much smaller. You know, Mid-Hudson region, you know, there's some of the downstate regions. You know, the Mohawk Valley region. You know, some of the areas that are a little bit closer, you know, maybe see, you know, a slightly larger impact, but the vast majority, again, of this overall state impact is in the central New York region. So that's something that we're able to capture, you know, automatically in the model based on, you know, the data, kind of the underlying, you know, budget data for the different regions, and then all of those are kind of being driven by the underlying economic and demographic results that I showed you in the economic summary. So with that, I will, apologies here. Let me just go to the Q&A slide, and then I'll be happy to take any questions. So Brian, please feel free to hop back in.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the great presentation, and thank you, Peter. We'll shortly be getting into the question and answer portion of this presentation. So if you have any questions, please enter them now. If we don't get to yours by the end of the hour, we'll be sure to reach out to you individually. We've already had some great questions come in, so I encourage you to continue asking more questions. And like I said, even if we don't get to it by 3 o'clock, we'll make sure to email you. I also want to remind everyone that the slides and a recording of this webinar will be sent in a link to your email shortly after the conclusion of this presentation. If you have any questions based off these materials, once you get a closer look at the numbers and charts and things like that, please reach out to info@remi.com, and we'll be sure to connect you with Dr. Evangelakis. So our first question was, can the REMI model identify jobs potentially unionized? I think there's a project labor agreement for construction, but nothing specific about union jobs in the operations.
Yeah, it's a good question. So that would be an additional layer that would be outside of the REMI model. So certainly, there are kind of aspects of union jobs that I think are kind of implicitly captured in the analysis. Probably most notably, what the workers are being paid. That's likely going to be influenced by the union status, and so that would be kind of reflected. But there's nothing in the model that says these jobs are like labeled as union jobs. So that would be kind of an additional layer of the analysis.
Awesome. The next question that we received is, does the benefit cost calculation include the increased costs of government services to Micron and the new workers and population?
It's a good question. So the specific benefit cost analysis that we did was looking at the revenue impacts relative to the incentives. So there are likely to be other costs as well. But this is the kind of the specific calculation was looking at the incentives, kind of the revenue impacts relative to the incentives. I think also, just to say, I think, with a lot of these major projects, there is, some expectation that the company aid, and I don't know the details, so, of the specific arrangements here. But I think that's generally my understanding is that, especially for major projects like this, there is hope for kind of partnership.
Awesome. The next question we received is, how does the impact of a $6 billion tax cut to Micron compare to a $6 billion tax cut or increased government spending in general, especially if we have the same implicit but-for assumptions?
So that's right. So, I mean, basically, in the case of Micron, the analysis that we ran is kind of showing what, that case would be, right? And so that's, our understanding of what that case would be. If we wanted to look at a different scenario, we're happy to discuss. It's a little bit hard to, without some additional kind of specificity to really get in the weeds. I think, here, Micron being, kind of a large facility, with kind of highly paid workers, and, a lot of investment spending, a lot of construction, I would say, here the multiplier is pretty strong. So I would say, generally speaking, it seems fairly, like a fairly robust impact. But certainly, happy to discuss, other specific kind of counterfactuals.
Great. The next question that we received is, did you use PI plus and tax PI?
So the tax PI model, basically has tax PI plus inside of it. So all of our specialty models, so that includes tax PI, but also our transportation model, Transite, our and kind of environmental and energy model, E3 plus, and several others. Those all include within them PI plus. And so when we just use tax PI, but the economic and demographic impacts, were essentially the PI plus engine of the model, and then the detailed fiscal analysis was allowed to be, it kind of was facilitated by having it be the tax PI. We're able to add in the revenue piece as well.
Awesome. The next question we received is, can you show us the employment impact by industry as you showed on your summary slide?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, what I can do for right now is I can just pop open the model and just go to employment by industry. So I'll go ahead and do that. Again, this is not the overall because this is just for phase 1. Phase 2 looks basically the same, just the numbers are a little bit different. But basically, I'll go down to the economic tables here where these are kind of more detailed results tables. So I'll go to the employment section and look at employment by industry. And what I'll do is I'll kind of pick out, say 2033, kind of a year somewhere in the middle. And I'm doing a sort here. And let me actually make this a little bit less cluttered here. So, and I'll just do a sort again. So we can see here, so this is kind of sorted, in the year 2033. So we can see here the impacts kind of broken out by industry and kind of sorted from, biggest to smallest. And so that, that goes all the way down. This is the 70 sector model. There's, we also offer the 160 sector, which has, basically instead of the 3-digit NAICS that you can kind of see here, the industry code, it has the 4-digit. So there's a lot more detail in the manufacturing and energy sectors, especially.
Great. Next question we received are revenue impacts before or after tax incentives?
The revenue impacts don't include the incentive. So the revenue impacts, we calculated what are the revenue impacts, kind of the positive revenue impacts, and we took the present value of that, and then we took the present value of the incentives and compared them against each other.
Great. Next question we received is, can you talk about any demographic assumptions you started with, such as population trends that are present already before Micron?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yep. Can you talk about any demographic assumptions you started with, such as population trends that are present already before Micron?
Sure. So what I'll say is that the model has built into it detailed economic and demographic forecasts. And so we didn't make any adjustments to those forecasts, but those are built into the model. So actually, maybe I'll just, instead of kind of toggling back and forth to this kind of last slide here, maybe I'll just stay in the model. And here I'll just go over to the demographic tables, and I'll just kind of show. Let's see, maybe we can do. Maybe we'll do it this way. And so, and actually, might be best actually. Apologies. I'm going to go to not the simulation, but I'm going to go to the associated kind of underlying control forecast that doesn't include the simulation. And so that'll show. So here that'll show, and this is, let me change the units here a little bit so it's a little bit more natural to read. Too many numbers. And we'll go here to millions. Maybe we'll add one decimal place just for a little bit of precision. But basically here, and let's. So what I'm going to do also is just get this to be just New York State. All right, great. So this is for the state as a whole. Here we see, at the time, kind of the underlying forecast. Again, going out through, actually here a little bit past the 2025 to 2055, I should say. But you can see here growing. This is in millions, so you see kind of growth over time. So that's kind of what's going on there. And I'll just pop back to the results. So yes, so there's detailed forecasts that go into the model. We didn't make any adjustments to those, but we did implicitly rely on them as kind of the counterfactual.
Awesome. Great. The next question we received was, is there a housing price variable in the output? Curious what this will do to the cost of living in the area.
Sure. So we do have housing price impacts. I should say, and I'll show it in a second in the model. I should say it's going to capture kind of an average impact. So there may be kind of local housing markets are always kind of quite idiosyncratic, just depending on what kind of what's selling and kind of the specific transactions. So the model doesn't get into that level of granularity, but it can give a sense. So here I'll go back to some of the price impacts, and let's see what we can do. Oh, apologies. Yeah, so here we see, and actually let me pull up the same table, but in the results. There, that's just the underlying. So here we'll go, Preston indices. And here I'm going to change this to percent change and make this a little bit more detailed. I'll just highlight here relative housing price. So here we have essentially the relative housing price and the relative non-residential land price. So this is kind of for residential and for non-residential for businesses. You can see here impact. This is at the state level. So kind of fairly diffuse, not super large. We can also switch this to look at the specific region. So if we look, for example, Central New York, we do see some larger impacts. Again, driven by population influx and growth in GDP. Anyway, so so there are some estimated impacts, though it's again kind of depending on the population inflows and the GDP impacts, kind of taking kind of a statistical approach to that. It's not super granular.
Awesome. We had a similar question come in, so I'll ask that one now. So can the increase in housing costs be seen from the model? So you kind of went over that. And then they elaborated, how is economic inequality assessed in this model?
That's a great question. So actually in this particular model, so maybe I'll start in a different place. So over the last couple of years, we've developed and now have a number of clients using our SEI or socioeconomic indicators module that can be attached onto any model. So some tax BI clients have it, and in the case of ESD, they don't happen to have it, so we don't have those results in this particular case. But that is doable in the model, and with the SEI module, you can look at a variety of those types of impacts, including employment by race, by gender, by educational attainment level, by income level, as well as impacts. We were just talking about kind of price impacts, impact on essentially consumer prices for households at different income levels. Certainly folks at different income levels have different spending profiles, and so if prices for the basket of goods that's more important for them goes up by more, they face a bigger price impact. And so anyway, so it's not visible in this particular analysis, but it is doable in the model. We have a number of clients at this point, including clients from Alaska to Louisiana to DC, at the federal level as well, at the local level, and so it's obviously become a high priority kind of across the board. So that is something that we offer.
Excellent. Awesome. The next question is, do land purchases actually have impacts, or are they just transfers?
So the way that we looked at the impacts of the land transaction basically was just to kind of make an estimate of what the real estate commission might be. So that was kind of captured as like the real economic activity, and the remainder being kind of a wealth transfer that's not going to have a direct economic impact. So we just captured the real estate piece.
Awesome. The next question was, we heard Onondaga County officials estimate population increase of 125,000. This is different from your 60,000 estimate, which is correct.
Oh, I'm definitely not going to answer that. I don't know what their approach to the projections were. So I can't speak to any comparison. We feel comfortable with how our model basically models kind of changes in population. I'm sure that the Onondaga County folks are great at their jobs as well. One thing I will say is, in this model, we don't have Onondaga County broken out. So we can't even make an apples to apples comparison. So I'll leave that question unanswered. We feel great, but I'm sure they did a great job as well.
Awesome. Great. So externalities are not, well, the question is, are externalities estimated within the model?
I mean, I guess I would need a little bit more information, but I would say, I might need a little bit more information to see. There are many different types of externalities. So, maybe if the person wants to re-ask the question, I'd be happy to address something more specific.
Awesome. I'll keep my eyes out for that. Continuing, can you talk more about the cost side expenditures of the fiscal analysis?
Sure. So that is that is something that's doable. That wasn't a part of our analysis. That wasn't a part of our scope. But that is something that's available in the model. It works similarly to the revenue analysis. There are some differences because the expenditure side is that's often more of a decision than the revenue side. Because aside from setting rates and policy, once tax rates are set and kind of tax policy is set, then aside from kind of the human mechanics of collecting the revenue, like it's like fairly mechanical. Like there's a certain amount of income, there's a certain tax rate, that brings in a certain amount of revenue. With expenditures, those are always choices. So we could certainly generate estimates based on the kind of historical patterns, but that's especially in a case where there's such a big change as here, it may not be the most reflective of what will happen just because of kind of the magnitude of the shift. So that is in principle something that we can do, but there are some more complicated considerations with doing expenditure estimates.
Great. The next question is, how is the effect of employee scarcity considered in the model?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the model includes, what the what the labor force is in the region. It includes detailed labor force participation rates, and so there's going to be an interaction of kind of employment demand and labor demand and labor supply. That'll drive things like compensation. So certainly that's going to play out in the model. And so, for example, just like the increase in job availability and maybe kind of the good pay of the jobs will attract population. Excuse me. It's also likely to attract more people into the labor force who are already in the region. I think also, and this probably doesn't fully address it. There is the piece of the analysis that looked at the training programs. I think that's also going to be an important kind of like long-term piece that was also talked about, for example, in the kind of announcement event. We're kind of joining with a lot of the local universities to kind of build out training programs to improve kind of the appropriate labor force over time, to kind of build that out locally, to build that pipeline. The good thing about this project, it's being such a long kind of ramp up period, that there's time to get that underway and kind of get that pipeline coming in.
We do. So we're getting very close to the end of the hour. I'll probably give one more question and see where we're at with that. And the rest, like I said before, we'll be sure to reach out to you personally. But the attendee who asked earlier about externalities has elaborated. The externalities such as public services, air quality, impacts on health, there may be many more. And they elaborated that it was somewhat answered previously, but if you can elaborate more on that.
Sure. Yeah. I think the kind of public service piece kind of was addressed already, but yeah, I would say air quality would be one that's not going to be directly addressed in this model. We actually I mentioned earlier in the webinar or maybe in this Q&A our E3+ model, kind of the energy and environment model. That does have an energy consumption and CO2 emissions module that allows you to look at energy consumption and emissions impacts from economic changes. So that's, again, not something that we had in this model. This is just the tax PI model. But in certain models, that is something that can be we can get at. And we also have for example, in our transportation model in Transite, we have parameters to look at, changes like in kind of road conditions and kind of expanding a road or something like that, and how that might affect, air quality, safety, leisure time. So there's, depending on the model and the context, there are ways to capture some of these externalities. And, we certainly, with air quality, for example, we have a longtime client. I mean, multiple, longtime clients, but, one in particular that I've worked with most closely is, South Coast Air Quality Management District. It's in Southern California. They've used the REMI model since the early 90s to look at the impact of air quality regulation. And so they've done a lot of interesting work on kind of air quality and health impacts.
Awesome. And now we'll do this one last question just because I think you'll be able to answer it pretty quickly. And they said general question. In REMI results, there was an output in GDP. What would be the difference between these two? And they predicted it would be intermediate inputs. And they said, if so, why would intermediate inputs be so close to GDP?
Yeah, so it is intermediate inputs, right? So GDP is kind of overall economic production, which is economic output minus intermediate inputs. I mean, it's gonna vary. I mean, generally we see, this is a fairly typical kind of GDP output kind of ratio. But it's going to depend a little bit on which industries are impacted. and kind of the level of intermediate inputs that are used in different industries. I mean, that kind of general question, I probably can't get into the weeds there. It seems fairly standard. I mean, there a lot there are a lot of intermediate inputs produced in the economy, and so it makes sense that a good amount of a healthy amount of the economic output is actually going intermediate inputs and not final goods. But, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think with that, like I had mentioned, there are a few great questions that we haven't had the chance to get to yet. So we will be sure to reach out to you personally sometime soon to address those. If you have a question that you haven't put in the question box yet, I encourage you to either quickly do it now or email info@remi.com, and I'll be able to connect you with Peter to help address those. I also want to remind everyone that a copy of the slides and a recording of this webinar will be sent to your email shortly, probably in about an hour. And you can email that same email address if you have any questions after getting a closer look at the numbers and everything like that. I want to thank Peter for the great presentation and thank everyone who attended. We hope you have a great day and a great week. And we hope to talk to you soon. Have a good one, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.